Good morning, and welcome to the Parent Power Hour, Part 2, Worried Parents and Anxious Kids, How to Help Your Student Manage School-Related Anxiety. We are excited to have Ann Dolin and Rachel Moss today. Ann is a former public school teacher and author who founded Educational Connections in 1998. The company specializes in helping students build executive function skills and study habits to perform better in school and ultimately in college. She and her team of more than 120 tutors, executive function coaches, college consultants, and parent coaches provide virtual support to families with kindergarten to college age students throughout the country. Anne is a past president of CHAD of Northern Virginia and is an advocate for students with ADHD and other learning differences. She is also the author of the award-winning book, Homework Made Simple: Tips, Tools, and Solutions for Stress-Free Homework, and her latest book, Getting Past Procrastination: How to Get Your Kids Organized, Focused, and Motivated Without Being the Bad Guy. I will now turn it to Ms. Dolan and to Ms. Moss.
Thank you so much, Nadia. It is such a pleasure to be with you here today and all of the parents from the Parent Resource Center. All right, let's get started. Today, we're talking about stressing less and learning more, strategies to empower your anxious student for a smoother school year. And this is such a perfect time to be discussing this topic as we're about a month into the school year and kids are getting into the swing of things, but probably also feeling some anxiety already. We have solutions for you. And I want to introduce you to Rachael Moss. Rachael, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Ann.
I'm so glad you're here with me today. And I have to tell you, Rachael is just the best at this topic. She has, experience as a teacher, working with students at the middle, high school, and college level. She is a coach here with me at Educational Connections, specializing in executive function. But what also is unique about Rachael is that she is the trainer of all of our staff. So she's our professional development strategist, working with coaches and tutors on a daily basis on how to help kids dial down their stress and improve their grades. All right, Rachael, so let's get started. Tell us what we're going to cover today and maybe a bit of what we're not going to do too.
Okay, I'm actually going to start with what we're not going to do because I think it's really important to set parameters for our educational discussions. So this isn't a diagnosis. This isn't a one size fits all. This isn't a quick fix. We are going to use some terms that are from the world of psychology, but we're not using them to diagnose anything. We're going to use the words in their most proper format. So if we're talking about anxiety, it's not going to be like what we feel when, we're late getting to the grocery store. We're going to be talking about things as they have to do with triggers, stress levels, that type of thing. But we're going to talk about things in an educational framework so that we can have solid strategies that anyone can use to help their favorite student.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Rachael. All right. So tell us, when we talk about anxiety and stress, what does that look like in kids?
So we tend to see three different things that we have up here on our beautiful little slide. The first thing that we see is what's called inconsistent presentation. So when we have a student who is anxious, it is not going to be all the time. So sometimes we have students that will present anxiety symptoms when there is a test, and we're going to be talking about test anxiety. For example, we will see students where they can get all their homework turned in science, for example, but then when it comes to math class, there's some kind of breakdown. You can get all your homework turned in science. Why can't you turn in that math homework? So that would be an example of inconsistent presentation. We can have a student who is cool as a cucumber all year long in all of the classes until that presentation or that research paper starts to rear its ugly head. So it's not happening all the time, but we are going to notice that there are times when that anxiety is taking place. And one of the things that I noticed already in our chat, the folks who are here, I am seeing that people are already identifying this inconsistent presentation. My favorite student is anxious with this situation or that situation. So that's the first thing we look for. Then we look for how the student is behaving. And there are two main camps that we'll often see. One is avoidance, and we as grown-ups may see that as something like procrastination. And that is an avoidance behavior. If I'm not doing it's not going to bother me. Or we will see hyperfixation, perfectionism. This is actually something that I saw a lot of the beautiful questions that we received before this presentation today were asking about perfectionism. We see that in hyperfixation. We also see, you put these things together, inconsistent presentation, avoidance or hyperfixation, and fireworks are behind me because I talk with my hands. We are going to see weak executive function skills. We're going to see a breakdown in organization, time management, planning ahead.
Yeah, you're right. I see all that in many of our students, Rachel, for sure. So let's start with the first one about test anxiety. And I noticed as people were coming in the room, they also mentioned test anxiety. So let's start here. Sometimes the way in which students study is not helping their test anxiety because they think they're putting in the time, which they are sometimes, but they're not seeing the fruits of their labor. So tell us what the research says in terms of alleviating test anxiety, and then we'll talk next about spaced practice versus cramming.
Yeah, so test anxiety, I think that this is a great way for us to start this conversation about anxiety because every single one of us has probably felt this at some point. So I remember, for example, I was taking what are called the praxis exams. I live in Pennsylvania, and you have to take praxis exams before you become a teacher. So there I am on the cusp of fulfilling my dream. And I have this exam in front of me on a screen. I have had to take off all the jewelry, all of like my phone and everything. Everything's locked in a locker. I'm just in there, me and my brain. And the test comes up on the screen, and I blacked out for about 20 minutes. I often describe it as on the screen, it was like I couldn't read my native language anymore. Like the words were like squiggling together. I was so overwhelmed by what the outcome of that test would mean. And whether you are taking a test for a career, whether you are taking a math test on division, that test anxiety can be crippling because we're thinking about the outcome. When we talk about anxiety, we're actually talking about future thinking. So it makes sense that when we are anxious about a test, we are anxious about the future and what the score on that test could mean for us. So this is a great way to start talking about anxiety because I think we've all had our favorite student deal with this. So one of the things that we always coach, and somebody in the chat said praxis anxiety is it's so real. Yeah, I see that somebody in here has also been through praxis anxiety specifically. But when we're studying for tests, one of the best ways to deal with this anxiety is something called spaced practice. Now, when I talk about this with students, I always use a metaphor of physical exercise to break down the best ways to engage in this mental exercise. So I'll have them, tell me, hey, what would happen if you did 2 or 3 leg days in a row? So like, Anne, what would happen if you did 2 or 3 leg days in a row?
I'd be pretty sore, and I probably wouldn't want to do it much anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And I had a kid once say to me, oh, you can't do that. You'll get noodle legs. Which I
Mhm.
thought was a really apt and vivid way to describe it. You will feel sore, you will feel unable to move, you'll feel like wobbly when you try to just do basic things. And that's the way that I talk to students about cramming or studying. So some of our questions that we received before this webinar started, we're talking about perfectionism in students. And this is one way to help students break that perfectionist anxiety cycle, to talk to them about the best way to study. So spaced practice is really simple. You look at when the test day is. It's Friday today. Let's say the test is on Friday. And then you back it up by a couple days. You study on Wednesday. You don't study on Thursday, you take the test on Friday. Another way to do it is test is on Friday. You study on Thursday, take a break on Wednesday, you study on Tuesday. You put a break in between study days. This is a very effective way for students to be able to separate out what they truly know from what they do not know. So when you study on day one and you take a break on day two, you can review the material and then you can see, oh, I actually remembered something, or oh, geez, Louise, I forgot that. I better repeat that on my flashcards or review that in my Quizlet or go through those teacher created PowerPoint slides again. So it's a way to help students retain more information because they're able to analyze the things that they are remembering from the things that they're not remembering. It helps them to break that perfectionism cycle a little bit, and it also helps them to focus on the study process in a more measured way.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And cramming is such an issue. And even just getting kids, and sometimes we even say, like, look, this is not even more time. Instead of that half hour you would have studied the night before, what if you just broke it up into two 15-minute intervals? And even that will make a difference because you're learning it, you're sleeping on it. And when you sleep on information, your brain reprocesses it and puts it into long-term memory.
Yeah, I want to address something. We have a really great question right now about this in the chat. So Christian just asked, with spaced practice, how should students include that in block scheduling? So here's the thing, Kristen, it all depends on what day the test is happening. So you look at the student's schedule at whether it's a block schedule or, a traditional everyday, like 7 or 8 periods of classes, and you say, okay, this is when the test is, and then you back it up from there. So because studying, we as teachers will have like a little review day or like a review game, but student studying is also happening out of the classroom. This is a great thing to do to also help them to manage, their time. Time management is such a key executive function. This type of planning also gives students control over their thinking and over the situation at hand, which is going to reduce that like perfectionism, that hyperfixation, and is also going to reduce those feelings of anxiety because anxiety is future thinking. So now we're kind of controlling our future. We're making a plan for when we're going to study, when we're going to take a break, and it's all based upon that test date. So I wanted to address that because that was such a
Yeah.
question to what we were just talking about.
That's right, Rachel. And I was also thinking that, sometimes when kids, we as parents will say, do you have homework? And they say no, when a lot of times they do. But the other thing is kids don't think, oh, wait, I have that biology test on Friday.
Right.
I should study for that as homework. They see it as like a nice to have. Whereas us as adults, we're like, no, that's homework. You need to prepare for that. And so often when we work with students, we're helping them identify, okay, when is that test date? Let's figure out what you're going to do to prepare for that test. And then that's going to go in your calendar
Mhm.
as a homework assignment. So Rachel, speaking of learning and retention of that information, tell us about the Stoplight Study Guide. I love this personally, and I've seen great results with this. Even when we share this with our kids that are so resistant, they're like, I'm not studying, they will do this.
This literally just happened to me last night. I was in a session with a student, has a big history test coming up, and very curmudgeonly is like, I don't want to study for that right now. And so I was like, oh, okay, I have a little study method here that maybe we could do together. And it was very well received. So the Stoplight Study Guide, this is a paired study strategy. You can do this with your favorite student, and you need minimal materials. You need a copy of student notes or a study guide that the student has filled out. and you need 3 colors from your highlighter pack that correspond with the colors of a stoplight. So you need a green, a yellow, and then in the highlighter pack, pink for red. So you, as the grown-up, you take the study guide, you take the student notes, and you ask basic questions of what is on the study guide to the student, and then they answer conversationally. This isn't about being perfect. This is another great way to reduce that hyperfixation and that perfectionism. They don't have to be perfect. They just have to recall. They are going to recall based on their participation in class, their reading. So this is before the studying is happening. Some of the stuff kids are going to just rattle off like nobody's business. So when I was working with my student last night and it was things to do with history, we were talking about colonial America. When we got to the Roanoke colony, by golly, he knew everything. Dates, names, where it was. That's green. It's the stuff I really know. I'm good to go. Then there were some things in that colonial history exercise that I did last night where he was like, oh, yeah, the Boston Tea Party. Okay, I know it was in Boston. I know there was tea. And I know it wasn't really a party, you know. He had like there was some fogginess there. That is a yellow, that's a caution. I remember some of it, but I'm not really retaining it the best. I definitely have to pump my brakes, slow down, and study. And then there were the things, again, using the example from last night, John Adams. No idea. That one is red. I need to stop and study the information about that individual, that term, whatever it is. So the study buddy, the grown-up in this case, anybody in our webinar today that's working with their favorite student, you work together with the student. You are the questioner and the color coder. At the end, the study guide is going to be covered in highlight. And you will see that 60 to 70% is going to be green. This is the result of your favorite student paying attention in class, doing the reading, engaging with the material. Then you're going to see things that are yellow or red. Those are the things that students have to study. And if you think about it, 60%, that's like a D level grade, 70% is a C. But you study that 40, 30% of the material, that gets you in that A territory. It also reduces burnout and it reduces some of that perfectionism hyperfixation because students realize I don't have to cram all of this information. I have to target my focus like a laser beam on these few things that I'm not retaining. It also helps those feelings of anxiety where students will sometimes feel like, oh, I don't know any of this. The student that I was working with last night, his response to studying was, well, I'm not good at history. So, I mean, like, I'll just do this later. He was going into that avoidance behavior. When he engaged with me in the Stoplight Study Guide, I was then, we do things online. I was able to share my screen with him because I do my highlighting using like an Apple Pencil type of thing. And I was able to show him, look at how much you know. Most of this page is green. I mean, you only have to study a couple of these historical figures and details about a few of these events. And it was a real eye-opener for him. And he said, oh, I think I'm better at this unit than other ones. Like he wasn't 100% ready to say, oh, maybe I'm good at history, but he was able to see I did well on this material. I knew more about this unit.
That's awesome, Rachel. I love that. And I love this for the kids that are such procrastinators that
Mhm.
just get out your highlighters and start with green if you want. And so
Oh yeah.
sometimes when you're resistant to start anything, you have to trick your brain into thinking, okay, this isn't going to be so hard. This is actually going to kind of be easy. And then if you start with green, it just kind of like opens it up and then you're able to keep going. So let's take a look at a couple of examples. And this is what it looks like when we work with students directly and we help them. And by the way, when we teach these skills, it's not good enough just to say, okay, we're working on the stoplight study guide. And just by, osmosis, we expect that kids do it by themselves in the future. That's kind of a misnomer of kids, especially those with ADHD and learning differences, is that they really do. They learn it, they practice some more, and they practice again. Rachael, I'm wondering if you can speak to that, and that, a lot of kids we work with, they just need that little extra reinforcement.
Yeah, this is such a powerful form of reinforcement because there's no way to get away from it. It's here, in black and white and green, yellow, and red. It is here. It is tangible evidence in front of them. So what you're seeing on this screen is on the left-hand side, this is actually a study guide. I have like a baby rocket scientist that I work with. This is from one of his, this is some sort of astronomy class. And I'm going to be real with you. I'm a smart lady, but I'm not this kind of smart. So this is one of his study guides. The blue that you see is my handwriting. So this is another thing, like if you would want to, students will take pictures of their study guides with their phones, and then I load it into my iPad and I can write on it. I can do all the color coding. It also preserves like student notes. On the right-hand side, this is English vocab from a ninth grader. And I saw some thinking in the chat about younger students. This works with anything. So if you have a third grader who has a spelling list, if you have a second grader who is learning like fundamentals of like mathematics in some way and wants to go over those ideas, this is just a technique that literally applies to any subject, any level. And that's why it was so important for us to show on our left-hand side, this is college level work in a highly technical science class. And then on the right-hand side, I think this is what a lot of us see as educators and family members. We see the vocab list. But what we also have here is evidence of understanding. This is also really valuable. You can see that like I have my handwriting. And sometimes what I'll do is I will write down details that a student is sharing with me as they're talking about a concept. So like, for example, on the left-hand side, there was one detail about stellar black holes. And then Jack, my student, noted that his professor told them specifically there would not be a lot of information about this on the test. So I put a little note there. These are also things that you can do to further help your students. If they get into that perfectionism, that hyperfixation, or that avoidance, where they're saying like, oh, I need to study everything, or, it's not even going to make sense for me to study because I'm not going to do good anyway. We can kind of use the evidence of their own words to bring them back to a more growth mindset, because when we can help students tap into their own beliefs and motivations, we can get them to these really wonderful places of growth in the future.
Rachael, I'm wondering if we could switch gears and talk a little bit about the feelings kids have around anxiety
Yeah.
and stress, and helping them to recognize those feelings. I love name and notice. I found great success with name and notice with my students. I know you have, and our coaches all use it.
Yeah.
Tell us what that means.
So this name and notice, these are just talking points to help us as beloved adults help our favorite student. Because I don't know about anybody here that's with us today, but when a young person in my life comes to me with anxiety, my knee-jerk reaction is fix it. So if I have a young person come to me who I love and they're like, I'm going to fail my test, or my math teacher doesn't like me, my knee-jerk reaction is to say, oh, you're going to be fine. Look how smart you are. I love you. We want to carry the children we love on pillows through this world and make sure that no hurt occurs in their lives. But when they are feeling anxiety, we have to make sure that we help them identify how we're feeling, and that we also acknowledge that we see and understand how they're feeling. So these are talking points that I use a lot in my sessions with students that I've used for years and years in my classroom. My background is literature and writing. And let me tell you something. I have seen kids become very anxious when I have handed them a copy of Great Expectations over 500 pages, or when I've told them we're going to write a 4 to 6 page research paper and you have to read and find your own sources. So I've seen a lot of these anxiety symptoms in the classroom and in, my own family members. So instead of rushing in to fix everything, we can say things like, you know what? I get the feeling that you're feeling like maybe anxious about English class. Am I right about that? Like, do you feel like my interpretation is off base? This allows them an inroad to talk to you about how they feel, where they know that they're going to be supported. It may be that they say, no, 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 I'm not anxious. I'm not. And you might know that they are, or they might just automatically open up to you. But talking points like this can really help. You can kind of redirect, like, I noticed you weren't really that nervous about English in sixth grade, but I feel like something about seventh grade is kind of getting to you. What do you think? What do you think it is? Is it more reading, or I noticed that this year you're really worried about things with your math homework. What's up with that? Did your teacher tell you about like a penalty for late work or something? So there are ways that we can pay attention to the students we love and to also direct conversations so that we're getting to the root of why they are feeling so anxious. And yeah, we are going to want to rush in and say, oh, let's fix this. I love you. I support you. But these questions allow them to vent some of their anxiety. And yeah, Amanda in the chat, and validate their feelings. That is so important.
Absolutely, Rachel. I completely agree with you. So tell us a little bit about triggers and what happens here.
Okay. So, whenever we have a student who is anxious, we want to try to identify what it is that is making them anxious. And this is another term that we're taking from psychology and we're using it properly. I think like a lot of time we hear trigger and we're thinking of like things on social media where there's maybe like a movie or something that's violent, and like, oh, trigger warning, it's violent, like we're thinking like something that has to do with pop culture. But really, things that trigger anxiety are the things that cause the anxiety. And if we pay attention to ways that students are expressing their feelings, we can identify the things that are really causing that anxiety response, the catalyst for that anxiety. So these are some talking points that I use. Like I will say to a student, I noticed that like for the last 2 or 3 weeks, every time we talk about what your top priorities are or what your homework is, you only want to focus on science. You're spending a lot of time on science. Do you have a test coming up? Like, why is that? That science is the big thing. Do you feel like, because I'm kind of getting the sense that you're a little bit nervous. Do you feel nervous for all your tests or is it just for science? Because we're going to notice patterns in how the students we love are expressing themselves after school. And this is another way that we can validate their feelings, that we can name and notice what is happening to them rather than coming in and trying to fix everything. So the fix everything would be like the student is only talking about one topic and we would want to rush in and fix it and say, "Oh, you're so good in science. You won the science fair in 6th grade." That's the fix it response. But we want to listen and say, "Okay, why is this student kind of fixated on one subject or one type of assessment?" Sometimes students will hyperfixate on their homework, or they will maybe even procrastinate and talk about how horrible that math test is going to be and how they could never study for it and that teacher doesn't even grade fair. These are always all ways to try to identify those triggers, name them, notice them, and then help students have more productive ways to think about their own thinking and to get to a better growth mindset.
Yeah, totally. You're right, Rachel. It's all about a growth mindset, and these strategies absolutely help. You've touched on this already, but and somebody in the chat said it, like the validation of feelings is so important for anxious kids, all kids.
One of the things that I hear all the time, and I work with students in sessions, I hear some version of blank hates me. Sometimes it's a group member. I was just working with a student a couple weeks ago who is a middle schooler, and there's a group project, and he does not want to do it. He is paired with somebody in his group who is not a friend at all. And it's like whenever we want to transition and work on that project in civics, it's like, oh my God, Bobby hates me. Oh, I hate it. I don't want to do it. And we've talked about the reality of the project. He and Bobby aren't sharing a grade. He and Bobby don't work on the things outside of school. They only have to collaborate for 40 minutes a day. But there's a hyperfixation there. There's an anxiety point there. There's a trigger there. And so I want to rush in and fix it, right? I want to say, "Oh, come on. Who cares? Who cares about that guy? You're a better baseball player than he is. You get better grades than he does." We want to we want to pump our kids up, but we also have to acknowledge how they're feeling. So, as much as I want to rush in and fix it for this student I really care about, I use talking points that are validating his feelings. And I say, "You know what? I'll tell you what, kiddo, I have had a job before where I knew one of my coworkers did not like me, and it made it so hard to go into work every day because I didn't know if that person was going to be mean to me, if that person was going to give me a dirty look. That's a really hard thing to go through. This also is one of the things that we can use. Students will sometimes feel that their teachers do not like them. So this is another thing that I say to them, you know what? I hear what you're saying. You're worried. You think that this English teacher doesn't like you. You think this English teacher is going to give you bad grades because of a personal conflict. I'll tell you what, if I thought my boss at work hated me, I would be so terrified to even get up, out of bed in the morning. So it's a way to validate how they feel and then to talk about strategies. I can understand that if you feel that your PE teacher hates you, you don't want to go to gym class. This is a place where we can start to bring in strategies. And I know we're going to talk about these. So first, we name and notice, and then we can start to build in strategies to help students now that their feelings have been validated so that they can move forward and that they can do even better things with their energy.
Yeah, that's such a great point, Rachel. It's kind of like you have to have the relationship. I know in our sessions, like respect, relationship, rapport, those are key before you can really teach strategies. The student has to believe that you're on their team and that this is a collaborative effort, and then they will open the door to you.
Yeah.
So let's talk about hyperfixation and avoidance. You mentioned this earlier. What are some strategies for it?
So we're now gonna we're getting into the strategies, and I know that so many of our questions that we received before our session started were asking about how can we create good routines for students. That was a question that I absolutely loved. The question, and I'm going to read it verbatim. What are some simple daily routines or habits parents can implement at home to support executive function and anxiety management? We are getting into that right now. And first, we have to revisit that two-tiered approach, or that two-pronged approach to hyperfixation and avoidance as the ways that anxiety manifests. So hyperfixation, I think that a lot of our folks too that are in the chat are identifying this. A student is focusing on one specific task or problem while ignoring all other things in life. Amanda even said, do they just want to study the thing that they feel strongest in? I see this as a crisis mode. You know, this can feel very motivating to a student. Okay, I'm just gonna do all this work. I'm gonna do all this, this calculus work. I have a student in one of my sessions that is taking an AP calculus class, and man, he is cooking through it at the expense of literally everything else. And that's the thing that we're working on right now with executive function. Okay, I understand that this is AP calculus, and you are right, my friend. This is for college credit. So again, future thinking. The kid knows what's at stake, and he is powering through it using crisis mode. Well, I have to get, the 5 on this AP Calc test. And so, my civics class, I mean, that's just a basic class. That isn't as important. So if my homework kind of falls by the wayside there, that's not a big deal. There's logical thinking there in a way, but there's also the motivation of I am in peril and I need to get this done. So that's the first thing I kind of try to identify. Like, is this kid feeling some kind of crisis, whether it's a real one, like a deadline is looming, or it's perceived? The other thing that I talk about with anxious students who are hyperfixated is a metaphor of a crystal ball. Like I'll kind of use a joke to break the tension. Like, babe, you are not looking in a crystal ball right now. You are not telling the future. Because sometimes when kids are hyperfixated, they are so focused on the future that they are now creating a story for themselves where if I do this, if I just do this and nothing else, I will not fail. I will be absolutely sure of having the outcome that I want. And so they have that, like, I call that the crystal ball mentality. And so that's something that I use as a talking point. Like, what makes you feel in control right now? What makes you feel like you could be telling the future or creating the outcome that you want? And then we can kind of try to examine that hyperfixation. And the other thing is, if you think about it, crisis mode and crystal ball thinking, this is perfectionism. So really, like throughout this whole conversation, perfectionism and hyperfixation, you could almost use those terms like interchangeably. The other thing that happens is you can have students that go into avoidance behaviors. And this for us is going to be like procrastination. The kid who has the big project, who has the big test, and then they're like, I don't have to study those spelling words. Test is on Friday. This could actually be an anxiety response. So a student may be thinking, you know, generally the avoidance behavior, the procrastination behavior, it's almost like an all or nothing mentality where students will, if you get to the root of it, will say something like, well, I don't even see the reason of studying anyway, because it's not like if I study, I'm going to get a good grade. So, I just might as well. And so then you can start to have the conversation of, well, so you mean to tell me you are going to guarantee, you are going to guarantee a bad grade by doing nothing rather than maybe to try something to see if we could have a different outcome. So these two things are what we generally see. And so we have to have strategies that are going to address both of these paths that anxiety may have our favorite student walking down.
So Rachel, let's talk about these. I mentioned earlier that this is one of my favorite, and you can do variations of Pomodoro if you feel like it's too much for younger kids. But tell us why this is so helpful for
So
students.
the Pomodoro technique, this is actually something that comes out of, like, it's used everywhere. It's used in the business world. It's used in the education world, and it was this is a practice that started from a man named Francesco Cirillo. So when he was a university student in the 80s, he was very anxious about his sociology class. He hated it. There was a book that he had to read, and he was so in that procrastination mindset, that avoidance mindset, that he was like, there's no way I can even do this. I could not pay attention to that thing if, you offered me $1 million. But he was mad at himself because he was a really smart person, and he was like, I can't do this. Like, I'm telling myself this story, but this isn't based on reality. So he grabs his kitchen timer and he sets it for 2 minutes, and he challenges himself to just sit down and read the darn book for 2 minutes. And lo and behold, when the timer goes off, he has read part of the book and he kind of like quizzes himself. He's retained the information. He didn't rush through it. He didn't say, well, I'm just going to skim this and see what I can do. His challenge was, can I actually pay attention for 2 minutes? This was one of those light bulb moments. He began studying the human attention span and he found out that 25 is our magic number. We have a 25-minute attention span. I mean, and I always liken this to the way that TV used to be, because I think like a lot of us like stream things now. But if you think about it, if you would sit down to watch your favorite TV show, how long is a TV show with commercials? It's 22 minutes, and then there are breaks. So it's like, oh, a little bit of the story, go get a glass of water, a little bit of the story, dad's making popcorn. You have these little breaks in the show, even with hour-long shows. An hour-long show with commercials is 44 minutes because you have portions, you have breaks, you have portions so that people can pay attention. This is something that kind of like we know in a way. It's like I always say to kids, it's dumb smart. You know, it's so smart, but then when you analyze it, you're like, I kind of already knew this. So Francesco Cirillo, he studies the human attention span and he figures out we have 25 minutes that we can deeply pay attention. So let's really supercharge that. The Pomodoro method is so easy. You need a timer and your work. You get ready to work. I always tell kids, get your playlist going, get your drink parade, get your favorite pen, get all set up to work. You are going to set a timer for 25 minutes and you are going to work. You're not going to race. You're going to do work that you're proud of. You're going to do work where you think to yourself, I have all the time in the world. I'm going to get this done well. For a lot of students, hide the timer. I have students that they will set the timer and put it in a drawer. I have students that will use their phone and then turn it over so they can't see it. If it's silent, all the better. And then after 25 minutes, you take a 5-minute break. And if you're learning how to do this, you can use that as reflection. So 25 minutes of calm work that you're proud of, and then a timed 5-minute break. When I work with students, the timed 5-minute break is a time where I talk to them about how they feel about the work. So when I have an anxious student, in that 5 minutes, I ask them, how much did you get done? That's awesome. Whatever they've gotten done is awesome. How do you feel about that amount of work? Tell me things that you just did that you're saying, this is work I'm proud to turn in. Are you surprised by how much work you got done? Sometimes avoidance, that procrastination, is because they're like, oh man, this worksheet I have to do in spelling, this is going to take me an hour. And then you set that timer for 25 minutes, and lo and behold, they have half of it done. And so now they can reflect on how long is this actually going to take me? This is actually not going to take me an hour. This is going to take me under an hour. This is also something that you can do where you can like zhuzh the time a little bit. In sessions when I work with students, especially anxious students, 25 minutes can seem insurmountable. I do what I call a mini Doro of 15 minutes. Can you work on this for 15 minutes? For hyperfixated kids, for those perfectionist kids, it's going to give a literal time limit so that they don't put too much of that fixation in the work, so that they can get something done and see how long it actually takes them. For students that are dealing with avoidance, it helps them to see, I can get some really good stuff done without a huge time commitment. So this is a way for them to really see the output of their time and how they can study and work more efficiently.
And Rachel, just to clarify, during this time, all the open windows are X'd out. Your phone is, maybe on the other side of the room. The TV is like, there's no external distractions, correct?
There aren't. And I have to say too, I was doing this with a student the other day in one of my sessions, and I don't know, like a lot of kids use like chat programs and stuff, and I heard one like chirping in the background. I'm like, kid, do you have Twitch open? Because like friends are talking about video games and stuff. I'm like, turn off that window. So yeah, we want to make sure to minimize all of the distractions. And so there's some great questions right now. Oh, for primary kids, one Bluey episode, 5 to 7 minutes. That's great. And so we have a question. So the break isn't a break away from the work environment. The 5 minutes is still about the work. Okay, so I want to clarify that one. When you're first working with a student who's anxious, you can use that 5 minutes for reflection. When they get more acclimated to this, it is a good idea to take a break fully away from the work. Or if they're still feeling anxious, go make a cup of tea, go feed the fish. I'm going to set a timer for 5 minutes, go get the wiggles out, take the dog for a turn around the backyard, and come back. You can use it however you want to. We use it in multiple ways. So sometimes we will, you're kind of like taking the pulse with your favorite student. There are times where my concern is getting my student back after 5 minutes. I would say in that case, use the paired reflection. Use that time to talk about the work that was performed. Use that time to reflect upon all the good that they did. It could also be a time to just have a silly conversation. I have a student in my sessions who is a film major, and sometimes when she wants to take a 5 minute break, she'll be like, "Oh man, I'm still feeling anxious. I got this deadline on the horizon." We talk about movies for 5 minutes, and it's a really nice, like, it is a break. Um, yeah.
And Rachel, sometimes you'll have kids that that's all they do is one Pomodoro, but we do know through the researcher you mentioned that really, even as an adult, your brain can handle a Pomodoro break, a Pomodoro break, a Pomodoro break, a Pomodoro if you're super advanced. But for some kids, it might just be one Pomodoro. Kind of depends.
Yeah,
Uh,
it might. Yeah.
So let's talk about student self-advocacy. I noticed there were a number of questions about this when we first started. Really important. And then we'll go into making that outreach.
Yeah, student self-advocacy is so important. So we talked earlier about like that name and notice. This is the strategy to help with some of those things that are causing anxiety that might be a little bit like interpersonal. So we want our students to be good self-advocates. We want them to be able to have conversations with those at school that are going to be really productive. And so this does take a little bit of coaching. The great thing is that in our modern world, they have options. They can send an email, they can send a message on Schoology, they can talk in person. So we have some like ways to get these self-advocacy conversations started. So this comes out of my experience as a writing teacher, and what I know about anybody who has to write is the blank page is a land of torture and pain. If we are told to write something and that cursor is blinking in front of us, there are kids that are like, I would rather hot wax my head than start writing anything. So I started when I was teaching writing. I would give my students a starter sentence. I would give them a fill in the blank thesis, for example. Here's a fill in the blank thesis. Put your ideas in there. And magically, when that first little phrase is on the page, they can get cooking and write the rest of it. So students don't really know how to start the conversation, especially with a teacher. Students will often like think like, oh, am I getting, should I say like, oh, am I understanding this right, or am I on the right track? But we want to coach them to have productive conversations. So we work on things like, hey, you know what, I'm having a hard time with this list of vocab words. Um, and I can't really understand, like, it says that they're all about school, but I'm not really understanding how all of these like French words are really about school. You know what? I might need some study help because I was doing my irregular verbs for my Spanish class, and I'm really having trouble of even like conjugating for like the first person singular. Could I work with you? I want you to know this is a great one for any student who has an individualized education plan. Students will often want to self-advocate for those things that they need, but they don't know how to start the conversation. And this is a great one from that. Hey, I want you to know that I actually do better when I'm seated at the front of the room, and I know that I'm really tall, and it would be nice if I was at the back of the room, but I need to be closer to the board. I want to talk to you about that. Another great way is to give them questions that they can use to talk to folks at the school. Do you remember when we were learning about like the ly words, the adverbs? I'm really not sure like where they go in the sentence, and I know we have a quiz on that coming up. I need help understanding this nitrogen cycle because I missed all those questions on the last test, and I know it's going to come up again. When is the best time that we could meet so that you and I could do one of those study sessions that you always have posted on Schoology? Do I just talk with you about that or do I schedule it online? These are all such powerful ways to give our favorite students self-advocacy, to get the answers that they need, the individualized attention that they want, so that they can absolutely succeed.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rachel. And what about, you mentioned fill in the blank.
Yeah.
How about this?
I love, as I like to tell my students, it's the most boring Mad Lib you're ever going to do. But it's probably the most powerful Mad Lib you're ever going to do. This is one that kids really struggle with. Emailing your teacher seems so simple, but then if you're a young person, you're like, oh my God, my teacher's going to be judging my spelling. And like, what if my email isn't good? And, this is a really smart person and I'm just a kid. We love this email template. I use this with my students all the time. I put it up on the screen in lesson space, and then like we have tools where we can just like type over it. And so we draft it together, and then kids can put that right into their email and send it off. I have actually had a couple kids that have written like a handwritten note using this template and put it like in their teacher's mailbox physically at the school, which I also think could be really valuable for littler kids. I think that if kids want that self-advocacy and they're younger, but they're maybe afraid to talk in person, this could be a really empowering thing to help them share their thinking, reduce some of that anxiety, and get the support they want.
I totally agree with you. And by the
Mhm.
way, parents, if you want this template, it's on our website. And we have a ton of resources for you that we've created. You can go to ectutoring.com/webinar-resources and find everything there. We also have an awesome blog on our homepage. And if you type in anything, you're struggling with motivation, anxiety, math, you can find articles specifically for your area of interest. So Rachel, this is what the final copy looks like, which I love. And I know when I first started doing this with kids, I thought, oh, what's the final product going to look like? But this is what the final product looks like. And it's pretty impressive. And often kids think, oh my God, I can never do something like this. But yes, you can with fill in the blanks.
hmm Yeah, and it does like the other thing I love about it too is whenever I use this with students, it has such a polish to it. Like it's just so darn professional and it really pumps them up. Like you can feel them like they're standing taller. They feel confident about this. They're having a professional, productive conversation about their education. I always tell kids like when I work with them, one of the things I tell them is, look, you're the CEO of your education. I'm the personal assistant. And, the personal assistant helps the CEO draft that email. This is a great way to give them that empowerment. And if they are anxious, this can take that temperature right down.
Totally agree, Rachel. So tell us a little bit about, this is all part of executive function coaching. Tell us what that looks like.
I mean, we use a web-based software called Lesson Space. You can see Riley and I are together in a session, and we are able to meet with each other in this private space that is, I always like to say it's fingerprinted or locked to a student. Every student has their own lesson space, and it's like if a smart board in a school and Zoom had a baby. So when we work with students, everything is kept there. They're worried about that essay that they're writing. We have things right there. We can also help students in so many different ways. Like advocacy strategies. It's also a great place for students to have another trusted adult to talk to who both has some skin in the game, but in a way doesn't. Like I always tell kids, look, I'm not here to judge you. I'm not here to grade you. I'm here to help you get better grades. I'm not here to cause you more, like to give you more school. I'm here to reduce that anxiety about school. So it's like, it's a safe space. They can focus on their issues, they can vent what they need to vent about, and they can really be productive and get an objective opinion on how they're doing in school and ways that they can succeed in an even more focused and growth mindset way.
And also, I'd say they're getting their work done too, which
Oh my
feels
God.
great.
Yeah. Every one of our sessions is tailored to that student's specific work. So when they come in, it's not like there's more school, like they have to sit through a lecture or something. We look at what they are doing in the moment. So first we check in, we touch base, they share their screen, we are looking at everything. We figure out what's due, we prioritize work, we put tasks on a calendar. Last night, a student I was working with, we were creating a 10-day calendar because he is going camping and he does not want to worry about his upcoming history test. We tackle the most worrisome assignments. This is where we really can identify where a kid is feeling some anxiety and notice, oh, talking about science a lot, or oh, saying that math worksheet isn't, that's not a big deal. I don't have to do that right now. I can just do that like 20 minutes before it's due. So we can tackle those worries and we can also anticipate obstacles.
Awesome. Thanks for that. And by the way, parents, we're going to go to a Q&A in about 1 minute. So if you have a question that you want to ask about, please put that in the chat right now. And Rachel, so you talked about the 4 steps for executive function. And if parents are interested in learning about our services, we're happy to talk to you about your child to see if what we do is a match for what you're looking for. I work with 3 amazing women, in addition to Rachel, of course, that are program managers, and their job is to talk to parents every day about their child and offer solutions. Jennifer, Kathy, and Ann Stewart are all remarkable, and you can get in touch with us by scanning the QR code to set up a call. You can go to our website, ectutoring.com, to learn more as well. But we offer subject tutoring, executive function coaching, test prep, and college admissions consulting. All right, Rachel, are you ready to go to Q&A now?
Oh my God, I can't wait.
Okay, awesome. So let me take a look and see. I'm sure we have a ton of questions, but let me start and look at some of the issues that parents are asking about. All right, give me a second.